Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little with me. You are greatly appreciated. This week we are discussing the case of the Fager family, where a father and his two daughters tragically lost their lives. Technically, this case remains unsolved despite what law enforcement believes. I also want to mention before we get into the video that there were not a lot of pictures involved in this case. I think I might have one of a news article, so I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is going to be more like a podcast style video as opposed to how my videos usually are. And I didn't want to omit the case just because of this, so I do apologize. I think it's still important for everyone to remember that this case is still open technically and out there, and that the Fagers deserve to have justice brought to their family. So, as always, I invite you to join me as we remember Philip, Sherry, and Kelly Fager. Philip and Mary Fager lived in Wichita, Kansas with their two daughters, Sherry and Kelly, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The pair were married for 11 years and created a comfortable life for their family. The family traveled often in their camper and lived in a one-story brick ranch-style home equipped with a two-car garage. They were considered to be an ordinary family with no known enemies or issues. Philip was described as a very particular man who took great pride in the upkeep and appearance of his home. He was an accountant for Boeing Military Airplane Company, and his co-workers stated he was a hard worker dedicated to his family. Their daughters, Kelly, aged 16, and Sherry, aged 9, were kind and enjoyed playing sports. Sherry was a third grader at Jefferson Elementary School, while Kelly was a junior at Southeast High School. She also worked part-time at McDonald's. On December 29, 1987, Mary Fager left to visit her parents who lived nearby in the city of Emporia, Kentucky. Her husband and daughters stayed behind, and sadly, it would be the last time she saw them alive. Mary returned home 3 days later on December 31, 1987, sometime in the afternoon. Her home looked as it always did, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and the front door was locked. It was midday on a Wednesday, so it wasn't uncommon for her husband or daughters to not be home, so entering a quiet and dark house wasn't strange. But something was eerie, and she couldn't explain why, so she started investigating her home, unaware of what was to come. Upon entering her living room, she found Philip on his back on the floor. He was deceased, feet pointed towards the door and fully clothed, still wearing his winter coat. In a panic, Mary ran to her neighbors across the street for help, where the police were then called. Initially, she believed her daughters weren't home because the family's car, a 1983 gray four-door Volkswagen Rabbit, was gone, and it wasn't uncommon for Kelly to drive it. So Mary was not concerned. She thought her daughters were safe, so she went with the police to the station to be interviewed, while police investigated the Fagers' home. It was discovered that Philip was shot 2 times in the back with a .38 caliber handgun from close range. Further search of the home turned up the bodies of both Sherry and Kelly inside of the solarium. The solarium was recently added onto the home where the Fagers kept their hot tub, and sadly, this is where both girls were discovered. They were floating in a 92-degree hot tub with a fabric cover on top of it. Police determined the top covering the hot tub was hinged and light enough that anyone on the inside could have easily pushed it back if they were alive. Sherry was nearly strangled with a half-inch black electrician's tape. She was found wearing lightweight clothing similar to pajamas, and her wrists were bound behind her with the same kind of tape used to strangle her. Autopsy revealed that Sherry had water in her lungs, so it was speculated she was only partially asphyxiated before being placed in the hot tub, where she inhaled water and drowned. Kelly was found nude next to her sister. Her body showed no marks and she was not bound. Kelly's cause of death was due to drowning. The house didn't appear to be broken into, and nothing was ransacked. They kept no weapons inside of the home, and there didn't seem to be signs of a struggle. Detectives did state one of the victims showed signs of resistance, but did not specify who. Evidence was sparse, but a few fingerprints and a semen sample was discovered from the hot tub. It was also determined the odds of this being a random attack seemed unlikely, since the solarium where the girls were discovered was not only a recent add-on, but couldn't be seen from the road. Only someone who knew the Fagers would know it was there. The only thing missing was the Volkswagen Rabbit, and since the girls were discovered, it meant someone, possibly the perpetrator, was responsible. So police put out an APB for the car. They searched the city and even notified other law enforcement agencies in the region, urging anyone who spotted it to call the police immediately. It was determined time of death was around 24 hours before the bodies were discovered. Neighbors were interviewed where they indicated that everything seemed okay at the house the day before. The morning paper from the previous day was taken into the house, whereas the current issue remained on the front steps. News of the murders shook up the quaint neighborhood and made the residents uneasy. Police discovered from neighbors that the Fagers recently had a contractor working on their home. He hadn't been seen around the neighborhood since the day before, and police had questions. The contractor was named William Butterworth, and according to his wife Shelley, he was missing. William, who went by Bill, was a 33-year-old independent contractor who grew up in Southern California. He served in the military after graduating high school and moved to Wichita, Kansas after he was discharged. Bill found work in the construction industry where he worked for Sunshine Rooms of Kansas before branching off and opening his own business. He served on the board of directors of the Wichita Area Home Builders Association from 1984 to 1985. Bill was the father of a 3-year-old and 6-month-old twins and was described as friendly and devoted to his family. Bill disappeared Wednesday, December 31st, about the same time Philip and his daughters were murdered. Initially, police did not rule him as just a suspect. They considered him as a victim. Bill's van was found in a McDonald's parking lot about 7 blocks away from the Fagers' home 2 days later. The keys were left inside of it. When asked about the van, neighbors confirmed they saw a similar van parked at the house several times that week. Police put out a description of Bill alongside the missing car, stating he was 5'8" and 180 pounds. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and a medium complexion with a stocky build. He was usually clean-shaven and last seen wearing blue or gray jeans, a green shirt with a white logo that said Sunshine Rooms, a black satin jacket with a logo, and white tennis shoes. 4 days after the discovery of the Fagers, Bill was located in Stuart, Florida, a town located 180 miles north of Miami. He was outside of a Howard Johnson hotel where he phoned his wife at the payphone. A relative tipped police off about the call, and police from Wichita worked with the phone company to trace the call, where they then contacted the department in Stuart to apprehend him. While still on the phone with Shelley, he was approached and arrested on the charge of grand theft auto. Bill was unharmed and didn't try to run, but he looked surprised when he was approached. He was wearing different clothes than what his wife recalled as well. Rather than his typical work attire, he had on slacks, a sports shirt, and a pair of loafers. The Fagers' car was found parked on a nearby street, and the keys to the car were found in Bill's front pocket. Bill had not checked into the hotel and was missing his wallet, watch, and wedding ring, items he always had, according to Shelley. Bill was taken to the Stuart Police Department, where he was held without bond at the request of the Wichita Police. Wichita arrived around 9 p.m. that night to start questioning him in relation to the homicide investigation. During initial interrogation, Bill told police he knew nothing about the triple homicide. In fact, he couldn't remember anything from the last 4 days. He stated he lost track of when and where he was. The last thing he remembered was getting up and leaving for work at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, before coming to while driving the Fagers' car when he heard a news broadcast on the radio. He then decided to pull the car over and call his wife. Bill had no ties in Florida, so no one could understand why he would go there of all places. Preliminary checks on Bill turned up no criminal arrest or convictions, and many of his acquaintances felt it was very unlikely that Bill was responsible. One of his coworkers was quoted saying, quote, "I know that the picture in the newspapers is the same person, but that's not like him. He is the type of person who would do anything to help anyone at any time, and he would go out of his way to do it," end quote. Bill wasn't known to lose his temper, and from all accounts, he was just a good guy. As for motive, police could only come up with one theory: money problems. From a discussion with his previous boss and a deep dive into county records, it was found Bill was dealing with legal and financial problems since 1981. He was sued, he hadn't registered his business with the Department of Revenue, he didn't renew his contractor's license, and he didn't file for permits for some of his jobs, including the Fager Solarium. Allegedly, he had no money. But evidence-wise, police had virtually nothing to connect Bill to the crime. The gun used on Philip wasn't found, and his fingerprints and DNA did not match those found in the house. The only conclusive thing was Bill's fingerprints were found in the Volkswagen. During his interrogation, Bill cried and put his head in his hands, but continued to tell them he knew nothing. This went on for 5 hours. The next day, Bill was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and felony theft. Bill was provided counsel from public defender Richard Ney, who considered an unconventional method to help prove his client's innocence. A month after Bill was charged with the murders, he still hadn't regained an ounce of memory, so Bill asked to see a psychologist in an attempt to recall what happened during those 4 days. His defense attorney Ney agreed and got a referral for Bill to see Dr. Robert Pace, a licensed clinical psychologist with experience in using hypnosis. Dr. Pace was not regularly employed by defense or state, but carried out 20 sessions with Bill over a 4-month period where he was hypnotized during half of them, with the first session being on February 15, 1988. Dr. Pace took extensive notes of the sessions, which were later furnished to the court and counsel at trial. The sessions were not recorded. The first 10 sessions were dedicated just to treating anxiety, since he was not able to relax and tap into his memories. But by the 11th time he was hypnotized, where he remembered minor details, such as the morning of the 31st being cold and where he ate lunch. Every session after, he continued to remember a little more each time, and eventually had a whole statement for his whereabouts on the 31st. Bill stated on December 31st he got up for work and left home. On his way to the Fager's house, he picked up a cup of coffee. He got to work where he was busy until lunchtime. Before taking off for lunch, he saw Mr. Fager and spoke to him about the current status of the job. When he returned, he found Mr. Fager's car gone and noted he either left or moved it into the garage. He started to work again, but stated he thought someone was in the solarium because of a strong chlorine smell and condensation on the glass. He thought maybe Kelly and a boyfriend were inside. He felt uncomfortable and decided to leave until they were done so he wouldn't disturb them. He decided to go to the mall to look for after-holiday deals, where he bought some new clothes. While at the mall, he saw some acquaintances before leaving. He theorized it was about 4:30 p.m. He remembered it was getting dark when he returned to the Fager's home and also noted the car had returned. There were no lights on in the solarium, so he got his key out to open the door to finish work. However, while remembering this detail, he started to cry. When he got the door open, he claimed to see Sherry floating face up in the hot tub. He tried to pull her out, but he realized she was already gone. He then headed into the main house searching for help, but sadly found Philip's body as well. He knelt down beside him and tried to get him to move. He remembered being cold and wet from trying to help Sherry, but then realized Philip was also deceased. So he picked up the keys laying next to Philip and got up when he heard a sound. He initially described this sound as a bump or something. He thought it could have been the dog. So he started towards the basement where he thought the noise originated. Bill recalled how his body tensed up and he cried more. He said, quote, "It wasn't the dog. I thought it was somebody down there. I was so scared. I turned around and stepped over the front door. I just wanted to get out of there," end quote. Bill explained the more he remembered about that day, the more the noise sounded like someone trying to cry for help or scream, and he didn't do anything. He became very emotional during the session and said, quote, "I keep thinking it could have been my kids and I just ran away," end quote. Dr. Pace asked if he thought Kelly was still down there and alive when he heard the noise, and Bill just said, "It seems like it, and had I not been such a coward, she might not have died." With the keys in hand, Bill left the Fager home for his van, but when he realized the keys were not his, he decided to grab the bag of clothes he purchased and take the Fager's car instead. Bill claimed he wanted to go home, but he couldn't. He felt he couldn't face his wife. He drew money from an ATM and drove past his house, but rather than go inside, he drove to Florida instead. Bill was still undergoing his hypnosis treatments when his trial started on May 9, 1988. Initially, the hypnosis treatments and testimony were not entered, and due to this, another trial had to be held for the admissibility of the post-hypnotic testimony. The second trial started on May 16, 1988, where Dr. Pace testified and provided notes for their sessions together. He believed based on the body language, Bill couldn't feign his trances. He also found the manner of recovery similar to other trauma patients, and consistency of his behavior within and between sessions supported his conclusions. Prior to treatment, Dr. Pace had no knowledge of the charges and no information from police regarding the crime. He was given minute information about the Fagers, which was provided by defense attorney Ney during the first session, which was only used for introductions. In the end, the court ruled the sessions as substantially safeguarded under the guidelines that 1. Sessions conducted were by a licensed psychologist. 2. Psychologist was not influenced by any party which would have tainted the sessions. 3. The psychologist's prior knowledge of the case was not written down. 4. The defendant wrote down pre-hypnotic memory prior to hypnosis. 5. The psychologist provided detailed records of the post-hypnotic sessions. 6. No one but the psychologist present during all but first session, which was not as meaningful. It was found the testimony was admissible under these guidelines and was subject to examination. The murder trial resumed on May 18, 1988. Bill testified on his own behalf and recalled the events surrounding the murder as he did during hypnosis. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks from the initial start date. The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering the county's most awaited verdict. William Butterworth was acquitted on all charges against him. The jury had a lot of concerns regarding the provided evidence and testimony. Many of the jurors believed Bill's post-hypnotic testimony. He remembered enough about the 4 days to know he wasn't responsible for the crime, but the use of hypnosis was still regarded as controversial. The testimony was considered circumstantial and uncorroborated. The jury determined Bill was more intelligent than this crime showed. They felt at the least if he was guilty, he wouldn't have talked to police without an attorney present. But in the end, it was not only the long list of many things that didn't make sense if he did it, but also his credibility from family, friends, attorney, and parish priest. The jury had serious doubts about the prosecution's case against Bill from the start. The case wasn't convincing enough, and they were stretching the evidence to fit their narrative. One juror was quoted saying, quote, "The circumstantial evidence for him being not guilty miserably outweighed the circumstantial evidence for him being guilty. It's the state's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and the evidence and witnesses weren't there." End quote. After the trial was over, Bill held his wife close and told reporters they looked forward to trying to resume as normal a life as they could at that point. Even though Bill was acquitted, Wichita police maintained he was the murderer. They decided the case was closed, since they had no evidence to indicate a second person was involved. They had no intentions to look further for the Fagers' murderers since they examined all evidence and eliminated numerous suspects and theories. These additional theories included the murders being connected to other unsolved homicides in the area and the notorious BTK killer being responsible. During the time of the Fagers' deaths, BTK was operating in the area, and many believed he was responsible since the crime appeared to be similar in nature. BTK acknowledged the murders, even sending a letter to Mary Fager in January of 1988. The letter stated, quote, "I didn't kill your family, but I admire the work," end quote, along with a drawing of a girl tied up. This drawing didn't resemble any of the known victims or positions they were found in. When Dennis Rader was arrested, an original copy of this letter was found in his possession. Bill's attorney Ney hoped Wichita police would reopen due to neglectful police work, but 72 hours after the murders, they decided Bill was responsible and nothing else was done. The funeral of Philip, Kelly, and Sherry Fager was held on January 14, 1988, and the three were laid to rest next to one another at the Lakeview Cemetery and Mausoleum in Wichita, Kansas. This case is considered unsolved. Hi friends, thank you for watching the video. As always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts and opinions, so leave a comment below and we can discuss this case. I hope you all are doing well, and I hope you enjoyed the double feature this week. I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out with me. You are all the best. I apologize again for this video being a little different, and we should be back to normal format next time. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for all your love and support, and I hope you have a great week ahead of you. But for now, stay safe out there, friends, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.